I knew the meeting was going south the second Brenda offered me that rotten pear from the HR fruit bowl. She had that tight-lipped, Stepford wife smirk she reserved for gaslighting sessions and diversity training. Cynthia, she said, steepling her hands like a cartoon villain dressed in Banana Republic, we just don't think this is the right time for promotion. Right time? I'd spent 4 years single-handedly dragging Innovate Inc. Branding out of the Stone Age, rebooting 3 major product lines and salvaging a 7-figure client after Mark, the CMO with the spine of a Twizzler, blew the launch by confusing TikTok with Tumblr. I see, I said. My voice was level, but I could feel heat crawling up my neck. My dignity was packing its suitcase. Brenda tilted her head. In this economy, you should just be grateful you have a job. That's when I knew I was done. Knew I was going to burn this place to the goddamn ground, even if I had to light it with my own 401k. Now, before I tell you what I did next, let me say this real quick. 97% of you are watching these stories without hitting subscribe button. Look, I'm out here trying to get my first ever 10k subscribers, and if even a few of y'all click that little button, it makes all the difference. You don't have to send flowers or hunt down Brenda. Just hit subscribe. I'll handle the rest. Anyway, Brenda stood up like we were done. She actually tried to smile at me, like this was a win-win, like she was handing me a scented candle and not spitting in my face. I stared at her for a second, let the silence curdle, and then slowly reached for my phone. I pressed record under the desk and said, just so I understand, doing more than what's asked, outperforming my male colleagues, generating 32% growth across every campaign I touch. Mentoring 2 junior strategists still doesn't justify a title bump? She blinked. Cynthia, let's not be dramatic. That dramatic hit me like a slap. Not wrong, just expected. Of course she'd say that. That was Brenda's whole HR brand. Make the woman feel like a lunatic for wanting credit. She didn't even realize she was being recorded when she added, look, some people just aren't leadership material. Maybe if you smiled more in meetings. I smiled then, big, too big. The kind of smile serial killers make in documentaries. Thanks, Brenda, I said, standing. This has been enlightening. That night, after half a bottle of Barefoot Moscato and a doom scroll through LinkedIn, I saw it. A vague listing from Apex Dynamics, Senior Strategy Director, Confidential Search, Competitive Compensation, must understand market disruption. It didn't mention them by name, but I knew their tone. Knew the font, hell. I deconstructed their style in a competitor breakdown last quarter. I clicked apply without thinking. No cover letter. Just uploaded my portfolio and added a line, ask your board if they're ready to win the war. It was impulsive, possibly career suicide, definitely reckless. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a ghost haunting Innovate's open plan office. I felt awake, charged, like someone had handed me a match and finally pointed me at the gas leak. By midnight, I had a calendar invite for a confidential screening interview with Apex's Executive Strategy Division. 20 minutes after that, I got an auto reply that said, Miss Sterling is looking forward to speaking with you directly. Miss Sterling. If Brenda was a box of expired vanilla pudding, Miss Sterling was a straight razor dipped in gold. I'd read about her. Apex's iron-fisted CEO with a penchant for calculated aggression and tailored suits that probably cost more than my salary. I stared at that email and felt my stomach twist. Because I knew then, this wasn't a new beginning. It was a war declaration, and I had just volunteered to be the first missile. The first 2 interviews were formalities, though nobody called them that. A polite brand officer named Greg asked me about cross-channel synergy like it meant something. A younger woman with a name like Fallen or Fern walked me through Apex's org chart, stopping every few seconds to highlight non-traditional value creators. Translation: Apex like sharks, quiet ones, the kind that knew how to smile while circling blood. But everything changed in interview 3. It was 7:02 p.m. on a Thursday when I walked into the private elevator at Apex's downtown headquarters. The receptionist didn't speak, just handed me a visitor badge and pushed PH. I'd read enough corporate thrillers to know that penthouse meetings weren't for onboarding. The elevator doors opened directly into a corner office that looked like it was carved out of onyx and intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows, art that probably cost more than my apartment, a single chair across from a desk bigger than my old cubicle, and behind that desk, Miss Sterling. If confidence could be weaponized, she'd be a ballistic missile. Her suit was charcoal gray armor. Her heels didn't click, they announced. No jewelry, no notes, just a stare that stripped me bare in 3 seconds flat. Cynthia, she said, motioning to the seat across from her. Tell me what's wrong with Innovate Inc. No hello, no resume talk, just that. I hesitated, you mean? From a marketing standpoint? She didn't blink. I mean from a viability standpoint. Sell me on why they're weak. I exhaled slowly. My gut said run. My ego said, finally, they've got legacy bloat. Too many mid-tier managers protecting fiefdoms. Their content pipeline is a graveyard of recycled pitches. Their CEO hasn't had a new idea since 2014, and their internal messaging is a masterclass in empty buzzwords. Sterling smiled faintly. Go on. I did. God help me, I did. I told her how Innovate cannibalized its own progress, how Brenda from HR shut down ideas if they came from the wrong mouth, how Mark couldn't close a deal without a golf cart and a Xanax. I talked for 30 minutes straight, peeling the company like an onion soaked in regret. When I finally stopped, she said, "We don't just want to beat them, Cynthia." She leaned in. "We want to become them, and then replace them from the inside out." My pulse kicked. I felt like I was watching a chessboard assemble in real time, and I was being offered queen. Sterling slid a document across the desk. One page, minimal print, no fluff. It wasn't an offer. It was a declaration of war. Title: Senior Strategy Director, Apex Dynamics. Compensation: high enough to make my student loans look like monopoly money. Benefits that included international relocation, stock options, executive support team, and one peculiar clause: bolded performance bonus tied to successful market share acquisitions specifically from Innovate Inc. I looked up. Sterling's voice softened, but not kindly. "We know about the Dream Launch campaign, the over-budget pilot project, the churn numbers. We've seen your fingerprints. What they ignored in you, we value. It wasn't flattery. It was fact. You're not being hired to run ads," she said. "You're being hired to end theirs." I should have felt scared. I should have felt morally torn. I should have asked for time to think. Instead, I picked up the pen. Because in that moment, every late night, every gaslight, every meeting where I was told to stay in my lane crystallized into one thought. They made me small. I'm about to make them extinct. My new office was in the far wing of Apex's executive floor, a soundproof box with reinforced glass, its own air system, and a biometric lock that required both a thumbprint and a voice ID. It wasn't an office. It was a war bunker dressed in minimalist Scandinavian furniture. No nameplate on the door, no welcome basket, just a tablet waiting on the desk, already loaded with a single file, Operation Iron Hand. I opened it, expecting orientation modules. Instead, I got a strategic kill list. Day 1 began with Miss Sterling entering unannounced, no knock, no entourage. She set a black folder on my desk like it was evidence in a criminal trial. Her voice was cold glass. "This is not marketing, this is dismantling." Inside were full bios of Innovate Inc. Board members, finances, family connections, voting records, addiction histories, off-the-record affairs, poorly hidden shell companies. It was deeper than I'd ever gone, even in my most paranoid rants. Stuff you don't get from LinkedIn or investor calls. One had been building this dossier for months, maybe years. "They've been sick for a long time," Sterling said. "We're just accelerating the expiration date." I flipped through the pages, stunned. One board member was quietly draining the company via a third-party contractor she co-owned with her brother. Another had made a donation to a controversial PAC that would turn Innovate's largest client's stomach. One, I realized with a sinking feeling, had once propositioned an intern in an email chain I thought had been deleted years ago. I swallowed. "You've had this? How long?" Sterling just raised an eyebrow. "Long enough. But we needed you to turn it from information into impact." That's when I understood. I wasn't the weapon, I was the trigger. I looked at the whiteboard behind me. Blank, pristine, too clean. So I grabbed a dry erase marker and wrote the first word of my new life in huge, angry letters: leverage. By noon, I was introduced to my team. 3 people, all killers in their own right. Felix, a cybersecurity savant with a British accent sharp enough to cut glass. Naomi, a forensic accountant with dead eyes and a sarcasm problem. And Rob, a brand strategist who used to work at Innovate before quitting in what he described as a mutual decision involving a fire alarm, 2 margaritas, and a resignation letter taped to Brenda's keyboard. I liked them instantly. Felix handed me a tablet showing Innovate's internal servers. "We already have passive access to their intranet. No right privileges, just eyes, for now." Naomi followed up. "We're tracking cash flow on that Dream Launch project. It's bleeding money like a hemophiliac on a trampoline." Sterling reappeared later that afternoon for the mission briefing. Standing at the head of the conference table, he outlined the objective like a general dispatching troops. "Your role," she said, fixing her gaze on me, "is to create instability. Make them question their direction. Undermine trust between departments. Seed doubt among investors. When we bid, they won't resist, they'll beg." She tapped a button and the screen behind her showed a graph. Apex's current valuation next to Innovate's. The delta was wide, but not unbridgeable. "Your insider knowledge is our unfair advantage. Exploit it. Innovate stock must dip below $30 a share before the acquisition window opens. You have 3 months. 3 months. It hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I wasn't just starting a new chapter, I was standing at the edge of a cliff, tasked with throwing my entire past over it. The gravity was enormous. I remembered laughing at Mark's quarterly pep talks, Brenda's passive-aggressive emails. Way HR had once docked my bonus over a typo in an internal memo while promoting a guy who once submitted a deck in Comic Sans. I looked Sterling in the eye. "And the people who don't deserve to be collateral damage?" Sterling didn't flinch. "That's your call, but don't lose focus. You can't punish the system without cracking a few bones." I nodded. Exhilaration bloomed in my chest, hot and high. Terror wasn't far behind, because now, I wasn't just planning campaigns, I was planning a corporate coup. The mind is a system. Like supply chains or PR crises, it has pressure points. You learn where the ego hides, where the fear lives, where the denial festers. That's how you predict reactions. That's how you weaponize people. By Monday morning, I'd built a complete psychological roadmap of Innovate's senior leadership. Not org charts, fragility charts. Mark, status addict, allergic to failure, deeply insecure about his own creativity, motivated by perception, not outcome, needs to be the smartest man in every room, even when he's the dumbest. Brenda, control freak in lipstick, terrified of being sidelined, even more terrified of accountability, keeps receipts but only if they benefit her. Thinks moral high ground is a piece of real estate you can bully your way into. The others followed the same pattern. One was on anxiety meds he thought no one knew about, they did. Another had a messy divorce settlement tied to company shares. One VP cried during performance reviews, every performance review. These weren't leaders. They were wobbly-legged deer convinced they were wolves. I didn't need to destroy them. I just needed to spook them hard enough that they trampled each other. The first move had to be surgical, public enough to rattle confidence, subtle enough not to scream sabotage. Enter Dream Launch, an ambitious internal initiative meant to revolutionize content delivery. In reality, a dumpster fire of bloated scope, poor documentation, and 3 feuding project managers. I'd written the initial brief before Brenda replaced half the dev team with interns. And now, they were beta testing on unstable architecture, already 6 weeks behind and hemorrhaging money. Perfect. That night, I created an anonymous submission for a tech gossip blog known for unofficial leaks, future-proofed. The kind of place investors and board engineers scrolled for juicy chaos between coffee breaks. I wrote it like a whistleblower with one foot out the door. Rumor mill says Innovate's Dream Launch project is about to implode. Over budget, understaffed. Management doubling down to save face, but morale's cratering. Internal docs suggest they're planning to spin it as experimental R&D to avoid investor backlash. I added just enough real detail to make it irrefutable. The post went live at 9:14 a.m. By 9:52, Innovate's Slack was on fire. By noon, I got my first trophy. A nervous investor tweet asking if the Dream Launch pivot was part of the roadmap or damage control. By 2:00 p.m., Innovate's internal newsletter had a rushed clarification update from Mark, loaded with more spin than a carnival ride. It worked, too well, because at 5:37 p.m., my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in months. Dave, old colleague, smart, kind, the kind of guy who brought muffins to interns on their first day. He'd once covered for me when I had strep and Brenda tried to dock my PTO for non-urgent illness. His message was short, crazy what's happening here. The vultures are circling. I stared at it for a full minute. Guilt cracked through my chest like ice under pressure. He didn't know I was one of the vultures, he just knew things were unraveling. I almost typed back, get out while you can, but I didn't, because if he asked why, I'd have to lie, or worse, tell the truth. I tossed my phone on the desk and stared out the glass wall of my office. The skyline looked sterile, too clean for what I was doing. That cold focus returned. Like a second skin I hadn't realized I'd been growing since Brenda's smirk that day. This wasn't just sabotage, this was symphony, and the first note had just been played. The stock dip was small, barely 2 points, but in the world of mid-cap tech it was a signal. A ripple on the surface that said something was bleeding below. Analysts noticed, so did the board. And just like I'd predicted, Mark panicked. Instead of reevaluating Dream Launch, he doubled down like a frat boy at a blackjack table. Pulled another $500,000 from Q4 reserves to accelerate deployment, which in Mark speak meant slapping duct tape on a sinking boat and calling it agile innovation. The dumbass actually used those words in a shareholder email. I had that email forwarded to me by 3 different Apex interns, all laughing so hard they CC'd me in memes. A man duct taping a banana to a wall, captioned Mark's growth strategy. I didn't laugh, I savored, because the next play wasn't just about public embarrassment. It was about revenue. It was about impact. Innovate's biggest client was Argent Solutions, an enterprise logistics firm with a reputation for loyalty and a low tolerance for chaos. I knew their renewal date down to the week. Knew their CTO hated Mark's tendency to overpromise and underdeliver. Knew their procurement director had once whispered over drinks that if Apex ever pitched them, they'd listen. I didn't pitch. I ambushed. We launched a hyper-targeted campaign disguised as a case study series. Apex branding, but quiet. No direct mention of Innovate, just subtle language that twisted the knife. We don't call it disruption when deadlines are missed. We call it incompetence. And we fix it. We bought ad space on the platforms Argent's team used for industry research. Sponsored the newsletters their CIO subscribed to. Dropped a white paper written by one of my new staffers. An elegant takedown of bloated software launches disguised as visionary platforms. It hit like napalm in a wind tunnel. The Argent procurement team reached out to Apex within 48 hours. By the end of the week, I was in a Zoom call with their leadership, walking them through a transition plan I'd quietly mocked up 6 months ago while still chained to Innovate's slow death machine. It was like slipping into my old clothes, but this time with sharper tailoring and a gun tucked in the lining. When the deal closed, Apex issued a short press release. excited to welcome Argent Solutions into the Apex family. No fanfare, no gloating. But Innovate stock took another dive, this time 4 points. Mark went suspiciously quiet on LinkedIn. And then, the cherry on top, Brenda. At 9:13 a.m. the next Monday, Innovate employees received a company-wide email from her desk titled, "A Note on Integrity." She opened with the phrase "challenging times," followed it up with a meandering lecture about loyalty in leadership, anonymous threats to stability, and my personal favorite, rising above temptation for short-term gain. I read the whole thing twice, and I opened the recording on my phone, the one from our last HR meeting. You should just be grateful you have a job. God, the irony practically dripped off the screen. She turned herself into a martyr, the brave paladin guarding corporate virtue from the traitor in our midst, as if she hadn't protected creeps, slashed bonuses, and shoved women out of promotions like it was pillates. The email didn't anger me, it energized me, because now I wasn't just hurting a company. I was dismantling a mythology, and watching the high priests flail as their temple burned, delicious. I found out Apex was buying Innovate stock the same way I found out about most important things at Apex, via a one-sentence Slack from Naomi, dry as toast and twice as deadly. We've initiated shadow buys. Portfolio coded under shell entity NXT3. Translation, we were officially circling the carcass. With every dip in Innovate's stock price, Apex quietly scooped up more. No sudden moves, no public statements, just a slow, calculated devouring, like sharks biting from underneath small, invisible wounds until there's no meat left. By all metrics, the plan was working. But then Dave texted again. "You free for coffee sometime this week?" Just 7 words, innocuous. But my heart kicked like it used to before a client pitch. He didn't follow up. No emoji, no passive-aggressive "guess you're busy," just waited, and that told me one thing: he was serious. I stared at the screen for a long time. Meeting him was dangerous, not just tactically, emotionally. Dave wasn't a pawn, he was a memory, a good one. Office breakfasts, inside jokes about Brenda's obsession with navy blazers, late nights building decks we both knew would be rewritten by Mark's golden boy. He had always seen me, even when the company didn't. But this wasn't before, this was now. Still, I agreed. I chose a coffee shop far from either office. Neutral territory, no logos, just mismatched mugs and too many plants. He was already there when I arrived, hunched over a chipped table with a black coffee and that look in his eyes, the one people get when the floor is crumbling beneath their feet but they're pretending it's just a loose tile. We hugged. Awkward brief, then sat. He didn't waste time. "Something's happening," he said, "and I think you know what it is." I held his gaze. "You think I'm leaking?" He shrugged. "I think you left, and 3 weeks later the company started bleeding from places only you would have known how to cut. It should have stung." It didn't, it clarified. "Why reach out then?" I asked. He looked down at his cup. "Because I'm not mad. I just want to understand." I said nothing. Then he added, "They're blaming you, you know." I blinked. "Who?" "Mark, in leadership meetings. Telling everyone the downturn started when you left. Said you were never that competent, that your campaigns were bloated and unsustainable. That Apex probably poached you as a sympathy hire." Something inside me went cold, not the kind of cold that numbs, the kind that focuses. He said that. Dave nodded. Brenda backed him up, said she always had doubts. I laughed once. A single, flat note that startled even me. I was a threat when I was quiet. Now I'm a scapegoat. Yeah, and I think they're scared. I looked at him for a long time. He didn't flinch. Just sipped his coffee like he hadn't just relit a fuse I'd tried to snuff out. Guilt had been gnawing at me for days. Faces like Dave's, people I respected, people who'd done nothing wrong, but hearing my name twisted, hearing them try to rewrite history with me as the failure, that flipped the switch. I slid my napkin toward him and tapped a finger on the table. "Take a vacation," I said. "Cash out a few sick days. Don't ask questions." He stared at me. "Why?" "Because the walls are going to move," I said softly. "And I don't want you under them when they do." He didn't push, just nodded. As I walked out, the guilt still simmered in my chest, but now it was acid. They thought they could bury me in silence. They forgot I built the map they're now choking on. It was time for the final act, and I was done sparing feelings. There's a moment in every demolition when the structure gives. Not all at once, not with fireworks, but with that quiet shift, beams groaning, walls settling, the kind of sound the earth makes right before something historic goes down. That moment had come, and I wasn't waiting for it anymore. After coffee with Dave, I didn't sleep. I paced my apartment with a glass of whiskey in one hand and the company's blood on my teeth. I thought about every time Mark had grinned through my pitches and then presented them as his own. Every time Brenda cut my budget and smiled while doing it. Every maybe next quarter I'd ever swallowed like poison. By sunrise, I was done playing chess. I opened the classified Apex channel and uploaded everything. It wasn't a leak. It was an autopsy. I gave them Innovate's creative accounting history, how Mark moved budget items between departments to inflate quarterly performance, sometimes marking R&D failures as pilot marketing initiatives to dodge blame. I'd seen it in passing before, flagged it, got brushed off. Now it was evidence. Then I dropped the nuclear core, a 2019 HR complaint against a VP who cornered a junior analyst at an offsite. A complaint that quietly disappeared after Brenda handled it internally. I'd seen the email chain, I'd saved it. Everyone had pretended it never happened, but trauma has a half-life. It glows even after the lights go out. Apex's legal team didn't hesitate. Within 72 hours, they went public with a formal hostile takeover bid. The statement hit all the polite notes: market alignment, synergy potential, long-term stability. But between the lines, it was a declaration: we are coming to collect. Innovate's board scrambled. I heard from Naomi that 2 directors tried to fly back early from a retreat in Napa. One had to cancel a safari. Cry me a river of monogrammed luggage. I watched the panic from my office like a voyeur at the world's most satisfying crime scene. Felix piped their internal Slack into a dummy dashboard, read only, just for us. The meltdown was operatic. One thread had Mark screaming in all caps about corporate espionage. Another had Brenda invoking NDA clauses like prayer beads. Someone tried to float the idea that this could be spun as an opportunity and was immediately ratioed into digital oblivion. Then the investor calls started. 3 firms pulled their preferred status. Arjun announced they'd lost confidence in Innovate's vision. And the final kick to the ribs, an anonymous source sent a leak to The Verge about the buried HR complaints. It went viral. Brenda's name trended on Twitter next to #complicit Karen. I watched it all unfold with a stillness I didn't recognize in myself. No joy, no gloating, just stillness. Like standing in a forest after a fire, soot in the air, the sound of trees breaking long after the blaze is gone. I had crossed the Rubicon. There was no turning back, no apologies, no negotiations. This wasn't about being heard anymore. This was about being remembered. By the time Sterling walked into my office, her smile was already 10 seconds ahead of her. "You've done well," she said. "They're drowning." I nodded once. "They always thought I'd be the one asking for mercy," I said quietly. She tilted her head. "What now?" I stared out the window, watching Innovate's logo flicker across a news banner on the building across the street, framed perfectly in the glass. "Now," I said. "Now I give them a front row seat to their own extinction." Board's knees were buckling. I could see it in the filings, the whispers, the desperate LinkedIn connections pinging Apex recruiters like flare guns in a storm. Innovate was circling the drain, and someone had finally convinced Mark to stop pretending it was just a clogged pipe. That's how we got the meeting. A closed-door negotiation, scheduled in Apex's top-floor executive suite. Mark and Brenda requested it personally, to explore non-hostile outcomes. That's how cowards phrase surrender. They didn't know I'd be in the room, that was the gift. I spent the night before in a quiet kind of adrenaline, not jittery, focused, like a sniper polishing her final bullet. I replayed our last conversation in my head, Brenda's smug voice telling me to be grateful, Mark's smirk when he said my numbers lacked executive vision. Their expressions had lived in my bones like parasites. But now, I had the scalpel. An hour before the meeting, Sterling stepped into my office with her usual quiet force. No preamble, just a single sentence, make them understand why this was inevitable. She paused at the door. "Burn it all down." She didn't say it like a threat. She said it like a benediction. At precisely 10 o'clock a.m., the doors opened, and Mark and Brenda stepped into the lion's den looking like they'd both aged a decade. Mark's tie was crooked. Brenda's makeup was hiding a nervous rash that used to bloom behind her ears whenever a scandal got too close. Miss Sterling stood at the head of the table, sleek and silent. She didn't even offer to shake hands. "Let's begin," she said. "We're here to discuss the terms of Innovate's transition should the board accept our revised acquisition bid." Brenda tried to smile. "We appreciate the willingness to negotiate." Sterling didn't flinch. "This isn't a negotiation." And then she turned to me. "Cynthia, why don't you walk them through the transition structure?" The moment hit like thunder in a glass room. Mark's head snapped toward me so hard I heard his neck pop. Brenda's eyes widened just for a second before her expression defaulted to corporate blankness. I took my time opening the folder. Let them sit in it. Let the silence stretch. Then I began. I outlined the leadership dissolutions, the asset consolidations, departmental purges. I spoke clearly with just enough edge to make them understand this wasn't theoretical. It was done. Mark tried to interrupt, asked about continuity assurances. I didn't look up. "There will be continuity, just not for you." Brenda leaned forward, desperation cracking through. "I think we can all agree that loyalty," I cut her off. I reached into my bag, pulled out a phone, and tapped play. Her voice, from all those months ago, poured into the room like poison. "In this economy, you should just be grateful you have a job." Silence. Mark blinked like a man who just realized the punchline was about him. Brenda froze, the same way she used to when someone asked about ethics in front of interns. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands. "You told me I wasn't leadership material," I said. "You were right. I wasn't built to manage your rot. I was built to tear it down." Sterling stood. "Effective immediately, Apex will assume all governance operations. All existing executive roles at Innovate Inc. will be eliminated as part of the integration." Mark opened his mouth again, closed it. Brenda looked down, blinking hard. I stood, packed my folder, turned to leave, then paused, looked over my shoulder. "Consider this my letter of gratitude," I said, voice steady. "You taught me what I was worth." And I walked out, leaving them in the ruins they built, lit by the fire they handed me. The walk to the boardroom felt longer than it was. Not because of nerves, those were gone. Burned out somewhere between the strategic asset map and the final HR scandal, I detonated like a birthday candle on Brenda's career. No, this walk was different. It was heavy with finality, with knowing there wouldn't be another round. No more schemes, no more vengeance to plan. Just the reckoning. Miss Sterling walked beside me, all composed precision and silent power. No small talk, just the quiet click of heels across the polished marble that had once seemed too expensive for someone like me to walk on without permission. The double doors opened. Mark and Brenda were already seated. When they saw me, I didn't need to speak. Their faces said it all. Brenda froze, her mouth twitching like she couldn't decide whether to scowl or smile. Mark went pale, paler than I'd ever seen him. His collar was soaked with sweat before I sat down. Sterling didn't bother with pleasantries. "We're here to formalize the acquisition structure," she said. Brenda jumped in, voice brittle with forced optimism. "We'd love to ensure this is a smooth transition. Obviously, we have valuable insights to offer." I slid a folder across the table. "Your insights are already cataloged, color-coded, and rendered obsolete." Mark narrowed his eyes. "So you're leading this." He said it like it was a personal insult. Like he still couldn't fathom the math where I ended up on the side of the table, and he was a line item in a redundancy report. "Yes," I said simply. "I am," and then I began. I pulled no punches, laid out the asset consolidation timeline, the termination packages, the legal exposure from the buried complaints, every one of them now fully documented and gift-wrapped for Apex's compliance team. Every question Mark raised, I answered with brutal accuracy. Every time Brenda tried to pivot, I shut her down with exact timestamps and receipts. They weren't in a negotiation, they were in a courtroom, and I was the prosecution. Brenda, cornered and visibly unraveling, made one last desperate play. She leaned forward, her tone suddenly warm. "Cynthia, I always tried to support you. This company meant something to all of us. Don't you think, on some level, you owe it that loyalty?" I didn't speak. I just pulled out my phone, hit play. "In this economy, you should just be grateful you have a job." Her own voice filled the room again, jagged and sharp and damning. Mark stared at the table like it might split open and swallow him whole. I let the silence hang there like smoke after a gunshot. Then I stood. "You told me to be grateful," I said, "so here it is." I walked to the end of the table, looked Brenda in the eye. "Consider this my letter of gratitude. You taught me what I was worth." I turned without another word. Sterling followed. The door closed behind us with a sound that felt less like an ending and more like a verdict. As we walked away, I didn't feel joy. I felt stillness. Like the world had finally caught up with me and fallen silent. Justice wasn't loud. It was complete. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.